It's a beautiful stop and shop in the Wilton. Penalty, but it was actually a tax, and that it. Absolutely. What's the name of the show?
Welcome to the Marty Heiser Show, where you always get the truth. I'm Dave Streit, and I'll be your host for this evening. The only question you got to ask yourself is, can you handle the truth? If you can, you came to the right place, because we've got nothing to sell but the truth. And if you're in for just pure entertainment, well, stick around. I think you'll find something to laugh at. Before I introduce my first guest, who I think you're really going to enjoy, let me just talk a little bit about what's happening in Israel right now. I met a Jewish person yesterday and had a great time talking with him. Talked to him for almost 2 hours. And I asked him, I said, how the heck did you guys figure out that there was this grand plot against the Israeli people that was going to coincide, I believe it was with Rosh Hashanah, which is September 24th. And I listened to the Israeli defense minister talk, and he said, it was nothing short of a miracle of God that terrorist attack was interrupted and prevented. And he told me, he said, do you remember those 3 Israeli students that were killed about 6 or 8 weeks ago? Just brutally murdered, unprovoked. These were unarmed teenagers minding their own business, and just out of the blue, they get hauled off, tortured, beat, and killed, and thrown to the wayside like just waste. He said after that, the Israelis went on a roundup campaign, and they said, we're going to get to the bottom of this nonsense. And they rounded up over 1,000 Hamas, Palestinian terrorist suspects. And they interrogated them one at a time. And the common theme that was popping up from people who didn't really know each other was the word tunnels. And as a result of those interrogations, then they started digging deeper, and they found out that there was a plot for 6,000 terrorists to pour through at least 23 known tunnels into the backyards of Israelis and to decimate as many people as they can. As a result of those 3 Israelis giving their life or sacrificing their life or being tortured or brutalized, they were able to uncover this plot. And let me tell you something. Anybody that tells them to show moderation, I say take a hike. I say defend your country. Turn the tables. Imagine America. What would we do? Oh, let's say if missiles were put in Cuba. How would that go over? Not very well. And those weren't even fired missiles. Imagine being bombed by a rain of missiles every day. How do you think you'd respond? Probably not very well. And I don't think anybody would talk about moderation. Barry Goldwater had a great quote. He said, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. I'll second that. I think Barry hit it right on the head. The other thing I want to bring up this evening is just a word about what Christians are enduring around the world right now. It's open season on Christians right now. They're being massacred. They're being driven out of their lands, out of their homes. People are coming to their houses, putting a gun to their head and saying, turn to Allah or you die. That's not exactly religious freedom. And I have no earthly idea why America gets entangled in battles in the Middle East with people like that. Like the rebels in Syria. And John McCain says, we need to go arm the rebels in Syria. Well, they turned into ISIS, and now they're using our weapons to do their bidding. It's just not a good situation. So when you look at it right now, 11% of the globe right now is experiencing war. And Christians right now are at the center of almost every one of those conflicts. Unarmed, unprovoked, not causing any trouble, minding their own business, and they're being targeted, beheaded, and tortured. So I think the 2 things we have to pray about tonight is we've got to pray for the Christians that are being persecuted, and we've got to pray for the nation of Israel. Sometimes we come on the show and we highlight some negatives. And over the past 5 years, I've been desperately looking for the future of America. We've had college grads on here, and we've asked them, hey, what's the American dream? And the response has been, hey, we don't have an American dream. We just kind of hang on every day and try and survive. I find that really, really deeply disturbing because I can understand how they got there. Look at the mountain of debt our generation handed to them, $200,000 per every college graduate, not in student loans, just in national debt. Toss on 100 plus in student loans, they're swimming in debt. Right now, on a percentage basis, you have the highest percentage of college graduates living at home in the history of this country. Something's wrong. They're not getting jobs. Why? We can talk about that all night. So I went to Milford Founders Days. My wife is a Burwell, and her great ancestors helped found Milford. So we went to Milford Days. Had a chance to meet a lot of people up there. And one of the people I met up there was an individual that was in the State House in some capacity. And I said, hey, what side are you on, the right or the left? And he said, well, actually, I'm on the left. So I talked to him for a while, and then I met the other gentleman standing there. And I said, oh, what side are you on? And he said, well, actually, I'm his cousin, and I'm on the right. And I thought to myself, who wouldn't want to be right? Everybody wants to be right. So, you think to yourself, what difference can one person make? And, in the Old Testament, Lot pleaded with God to spare Sodom and Gomorrah if they could find just one righteous person. Couldn't find them. Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. In Ezekiel, it says, and I sought for a man among them who should build up the wall and stand in the breach before the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. The point being, not to compare my next guest with some biblical creature, but to just say that one person can make a difference. And you just gotta believe, and you can't always mope around complaining. Get up, get going, you can make a difference. So, with that build up, I'm gonna turn to my first guest, and his name is Matt Gaynor. He's running for the 14th District State Senate, and he's running against Gail Schlossberg, 20 years old. What could possibly convince a 20-year-old to run for politics? Without further ado, Matt Gaynor. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'd like to respond to the reason I'm running with the Bible quote, as you have actually used in your introduction of me. Psalms 137:1. We sat beside the rivers of Babylon and wept when we remembered Zion. What motivated me to run was the possibility that I would be chased out of Connecticut, as so many other youth have been, because there's no jobs here. It's way too expensive to live here, and as you said, too many college graduates are living home once they graduate college. We're graduating with a mountain of debt, and our cries have fallen on deaf ears. Before I started to run, politicians wouldn't give you the time of day. The second you start to run, people start to listen. And to your point, I'm not just one person. There's a lot of 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, young college students, high schoolers standing up and saying, we've had enough of being bullied.
There you go. Do we have a caller?
Dave, great show, as always.
Thanks.
I don't know where Larry the Liberal is, but, always good to have him on. Hey, Matt, great to see some youth.
Thank you very much.
Youth trying to get our government back. I want to point out something. My son, who's going off to college this year, was at the VFW Auxiliary receiving a scholarship award. And the lieutenant governor of this state comes in, and she goes up and she congratulates all the young men and ladies that were scholarship recipients. And 3 times consecutively she says, "Come back to Connecticut. We need you. Come back to Connecticut." The issue is there's nothing to come back to because we're losing jobs. The jobs that we have recovered since the recession are lower paying jobs. So, Matt, we need guys like you to come in there and turn this thing around.
It's a good point.
Yeah,
it's a good point. So what do you say to that? How the heck do you get jobs back here? We've got a manufacturing tax, right?
Yep.
And so you can't manufacture here. We don't have a single power plant, right? Or we don't produce any energy here. There's no fracking, there's no oil wells, there's no coal, there's nothing here, right?
Yeah, on natural resources, there aren't too many natural resources to mine here. That's a problem we can't really fix, no matter who you have in charge. But to the problem of jobs, it's simple. It's a simple problem. we are taxed too much. We're at a point where we're taxing and we're decentivizing investment in Connecticut. The companies that are investing in Connecticut now are receiving these absurd deals from the state. And frankly,
give us an example.
The UTC deal, which my opponent has, said
Sikorsky.
Yes, which my region of the state hinges on. The problem is, with these sweetheart deals, it's impossible for a corporation to say no. You're saying if I invest $500 million, the state's going to kick back $400 million? You'd be crazy not to take that deal. And that feeds into a larger narrative of these career politicians missing the point. Businesses don't want to stay here, and what are we going to say to them?
Right.
Oh, okay, well, if you stay, we'll give you all these ridiculous deals. What about that manufacturer of 70, who they're not going to get these sweetheart deals? They don't employ more than 200 people. They're not eligible for the first 5. You're just going to say, oh, okay, well, too bad. You don't employ enough people.
Right. We should try harder to keep companies from moving out.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
And I grew up in manufacturing. My grandparents started a factory. It was a family-run factory. Towards the height, we employed about 70 people right in my hometown of Milford. Unfortunately, what we've seen is an exodus of manufacturing in Connecticut. Manufacturing is very unique in that it, as economists say, it operates as a tree. It goes out and it impacts a ton of different industries. If you want to revive Connecticut, manufacturing's the key. And one of the best ways you can do that is by getting rid of these absurd burdens and making it so difficult for these companies to start here, and these taxes. As you said, there's a manufacturing tax. That's ridiculous.
So let's grab this call. Caller, do we have a question for Matt?
Yeah, the guy, he seems to make a lot of sense. It's great to hear a fresh candidate out there, and I agree about the corporate welfare. Also, is he willing to try to do something about the amount of money we spend on regular welfare in this state?
It's a good question.
Absolutely. I don't understand.
Thanks, caller.
Why we're just in. It actually feeds into a larger problem we're having in the inner cities. Where is this money going that we're allegedly pumping so much in? You have 40% child poverty rating in New Haven and Bridgeport, and Milford is smack dab in between those two towns.
You're telling me our social policies are failing?
I know, it's hard to believe, right?
Unimaginable.
It's crazy. We're spending these almost billions of dollars, and where's it going? That's the question we have to ask. And frankly, I think it's going into the pockets of certain people who benefit from it. I think we've seen a massive expansion of middle management in the state, and that's part of the problem. We have over 8,000 employees in the state of Connecticut making over $100,000. That's absurd.
Now, are these in the unions, or these are just state employees?
No, these actually, it's funny. I've reached out to a lot of unions historically. There's Local 34 in New Haven, and 35 they deal with Yale. Unions sort of get demonized by the right the same way the Koch brothers get demonized by the left. And the problem is the unions are the ones getting pinched. The unions are getting kicked in the teeth by these Democrats, because really they're just a political machine parading around as something that used to be a political party in Connecticut, at least. And these unions are getting kicked in the teeth, they're getting left out. And yet you're seeing this middle management, which isn't covered by the unions, expand. You have this assistant director of some, internal affairs or something for a department popping up all over the place. It's absurd. And they're getting the same benefits these unions do, which the unions, it's different paying, $40,000 a year for a construction worker versus $120,000 a year for somebody in middle management.
So the thing that absolutely boggles my mind is that the unions, not to digress and get too far off your campaign and Connecticut politics,
Yep.
The unions sold their soul to the devil. Bear with me 1 second. Caller, did you have a question?
I do. Hey, Matt, love the fact that you're focused on manufacturing. I got a question for you, though. Mossberg, largest manufacturer of shotguns in the world, headquartered in Connecticut, just moved a lot of production out to Texas. Other firearms manufacturers are following. Malloy and Blumenthal are just driving them out of here. What do you do? Should you be elected? What would your part be in trying to turn that around and trying to get some of those great manufacturers back here?
Hey, just 1 second.
I'll hang up.
Yeah. 1 second there, caller. Are you getting audio on the TV there?
I walked away.
Okay, but before you walked away, you were?
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks. Just wanted to double check.
Yep.
Okay, so what do you say to that? Now, some the liberals will say, yeah, that's fine, let's let these gun manufacturers move out of here. What do you think?
you're just dividing manufacturing up. Oh, well, gun manufacturing, we can do without them, but we really want drill manufacturing to stay. And I don't understand the logic there. Actually, I went to a friend of mine who owns a small business, a small manufacturing business in Bridgeport. They employ about 15 people, is considering moving to Texas because they have just these phenomenal incentives. And once you get there, it's so much cheaper to do business. Their energy costs are about a fourth of ours. We have the second highest energy cost in the country, and that's just ridiculous. I don't understand why.
Well, a third of our electricity bill is taxes.
Yeah, and where are those taxes going? It comes back to that. Where is this money going? And we're paying all these absurd taxes. Are we seeing the benefits? Right. I don't think so.
Right. And meanwhile, you got a guy in Washington that has absolutely crushed the coal industry, and as a result, electricity prices have absolutely skyrocketed. Meanwhile, and this is what's really interesting, so the greenies and the environmentalists, again, not to digress, think they've saved the planet by crushing the coal industry. Yes, we crushed the coal industry. Okay, this is great. America has the cleanest coal factories, or the cleanest power plants. Bear with me 1 second. America has the cleanest power plants on the planet on a relative basis. So we killed the coal industry in America. So none of these power plants can use the coal. Now all that coal is being shipped to China that has the dirtiest power plants on the planet. And the net effect is the coal industry now is polluting more than it ever has. These things just don't make sense. Jesse Jackson ran on a platform, this was 20 years ago. And I've got nothing in common with Jesse Jackson, but his campaign slogan was, I want to take common sense to high places. By golly, that's what I want too. I want to see politicians, for a change, taking common sense to high places. So anyway, let me back up a second, because I want to get into the mind of how Matt Gaynor at age 20 got so much common sense. When did you first start getting interested in politics?
I mean, I had been involved with politics at an early age, mostly helping out local campaigns.
Okay.
Running was kind of an odd concept to me. I never really pictured myself, because I'm not that outgoing, believe it or not. I'm pretty camera shy.
Kind of a shy person?
Yeah, I used to be kind of a shy person.
Yeah, so let's go run for the House, right?
This sort of breaks you out of your shell.
Let me grab this call. Caller, what do you got?
Yes, I'd just like to ask Matt a question. Before the people can go to work, they have to be educated. What is your position on Common Core? Mine is it should be eliminated. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much for that call.
Thank you.
As a state, we're somewhat limited with what we can do to stop Common Core, but it's Common Core, I don't understand the logic behind it. You're asking millions of educators and tens of millions of students to all take one step at once. It's one of those ideas, as many liberal ideas are. It's great in theory, but in practicality, you're asking way too much. I grew up in the age of standardized testing. We have constant standardized testing. It's not just, and that's the big SBAC testing. That's the big problem here. It takes weeks out of the education time, and it's not like we're getting more education time. We're just focusing more on these tests. It's ridiculous. The teachers have to teach to the test. Nothing should come between a teacher and teaching. And Common Core does that. I'm absolutely against Common Core. I think, theoretically, yeah, it sounds nice. But in practicality, which if we could look more at, back to your point about common sense, it's not going to work out. And it's not going to work out on a national level or on a state level, for that matter.
Well, and here's another thing, getting back to, and I'm jumping around a little bit because I still want to get back to, what got you to where you are today. But, the thing that just boggles my mind is that, with the exception of, Fairfield Public Schools, if you look on a national average, and we've got 30% of the kids coming out of high school are illiterate. Detroit schools, 90% of the kids can't read or write. 50% of the population of Detroit can't read or write. Let's grab this call. Hang on 1 second. Caller, you have a question for Matt?
All right, David.
How are you? So, the thing you got to ask yourself is, why is it that the Democrats are always willing to double down on failed policies, right? So you look at our public schools, you've got a failure everywhere you turn. Like I said, there's exceptions, and some Fairfield schools have some great schools. But then the liberals like to control that voting block, and they want to shut down homeschooling. They want to shut down school choice. how do we break this never-ending cycle of problem? And then maybe you can also answer why we have state union, why people in education are in unions in the first place. How do we break this cycle of failure in public education?
Well, it's funny, actually. There's a lot of everyday citizens standing up and saying, we've had enough. I've talked to West Haven as a portion of my district, in addition to Milford and Orange and Woodbridge, and I've talked to education groups and all of them. And teacher unions, you have teacher unions and parents on the same page, which never happens. And then they're all saying, we've had enough with the way the state and the national government is treating education. It's not going to be this magic bullet, and for some reason, people on, that seem to be left-leaning, have this idea that, okay, if we just had more of X, this will solve the problem. This isn't a very conservative stance, but I believe in facts and I believe in what works. And universal pre-K is one of those things that works. The state's universal pre-K system isn't exactly what it is. In inner cities with these 40% child poverty ratings, like Bridgeport, like New Haven, like Hartford, would benefit greatly from having universal pre-K. It's a common sense thing. It's about $6,000 a year to educate some of these children. Let's fire some of these do-nothing middle management guys and start funding a program that would actually work.
I think 6,000 might be light, but hang on one second. Caller, do you have a question for Matt?
Matt, I do. I'm in the same place with you as Common Core. I think it's hogwash. We got to get rid of it. But that's not what I called for. More of a national stage question for you. A little bit of a political intellect point of view, if you will. Rand Paul recently spoke at UC Berkeley, a haven of liberals. Spoke to them about the NSA and the monitoring they're doing, and he won those students over. He then goes on MSNBC, talks about tort reform, wins over those liberal folks. Yet he's avoiding Fox. What do you think of this strategy? Do you think he can get enough of the lefty voters and capture enough of the conservative constituent in the Republican Party to potentially win? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it's a good point.
2 years down the road is a long time to think, but Rand Paul does bring up a good point. When you speak the conservative message to a lot of people, they sit there and they think, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. And then when you show them, look at these areas where the conservative policies have succeeded. Lower taxes is working wonders on the southern economies. And why isn't it working in Connecticut? Because we're overtaxing people, plain and simple. And people always picture colleges as this breeding ground for liberals. And obviously as a conservative on campus, you're going around and you're finding, wow, the conservative tent is a lot larger than people realize. We have LGBTQ members who are a part of our college Republicans. We have, black, white, Jewish, Hispanic. But the problem with Republicans as a whole is we have this messaging problem, and we focus too much play into our own stereotypes by running what seem to be country club members. But I'm obviously not your typical Republican. A 20-year-old isn't a typical Republican. You think, oh, you should be a Democrat. And sometimes I get that from people, oh, what are you doing on that side? But when you explain the message, as Rand Paul is doing, to conservative members, or to liberal or conservative, whatever their ideology, he's winning them over.
Yeah, Carl, you have a question for Matt?
I think China was destroyed many years ago when they destroyed China where 100 places were killed in the civil wars there, and they wanted more places killed. People were dead. And I think the people were dead all the way around China and to Israel. And there was a fire down there. And they think that people destroyed it. That's what I think there was. And Matt, how do you feel about it? About people of the Civil Wars, that people destroyed it, all the countries they have seen. How do you feel about that, Matt? How do you feel about it?
I'm sorry. How do we feel about what about the Civil War?
How do we feel about China? I think China was destroyed from many years ago when they just started.
I'm not real sure, but let me just defer to Matt. Not real sure on that one. Anyway, let's go back a little bit and let's start from, you come from a conservative family.
Family's divided, kind of funny. We have, very liberal members and very, very conservative members. There's a funny story.
That must make for a great family reunion.
Oh, Thanksgivings are fun, I'll tell you that much. My aunt was working for the Democratic mayor at the time as a director of welfare for the city of Milford. And as she's running for re-election, she's the mayor at the time. My aunt is running her campaign. She came home one night to find her parents having a fundraiser. She realizes the fundraiser's for her opponent, or her boss's opponent.
Kidding.
Yes. She is still very bitter about that. It's
So her parents were raising money for her opponent.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. And we're all civil. We're family at the end of the day, but we definitely have our arguments. My cousin is a Democrat in the state house, and he'll tell you we have quite our share of arguments over all kinds of things.
See, I have some left-leaning, as in falling off the cliff, left-leaning family members, not necessarily immediate family members, and I sit there and I engage them in conversation, and I swear I'm on a different planet. It's like, you don't even think before you speak. Hang on a second. Caller, do you have a question?
Hello?
Yeah, who's there?
Yeah, this is Rich, and I have a question for the representative.
Yeah, what do you got, Rich?
I'd like to know what he thinks about climate change and what his opinions are on solar panels and solarized Brookfield.
Should I ask him about the Koch brothers, too?
Oh, I'd love to talk to him about the Koch. The two favorite people in the whole wide world.
Rich, I am flattered that you take the time to watch our show, and I always appreciate your contribution. So let me ask him about solar panels and climate change.
Yeah, so I'll hang up and I'll listen.
Great, thanks.
I'm all for environmental protection. I'm for what works. The jury's still out.
You really want clean drinking water?
Yeah, I know, crazy, right?
You really want clean air? You sound like a freaky environmentalist.
I know, it's crazy, but
God.
we have a shoreline town in Milford. We have 17.1 miles of gorgeous coast. Shameless plug for my city. But we had, 2 years ago when we had Hurricane Sandy, followed immediately a week later by...
That was because of global warming, though.
By a snowstorm. It could be as a result of climate change.
I was kidding.
Yeah, and that's a major concern for my district, especially a low-lying coastal town. We have to, worry about these things. But are solar panels the only answer? No, there's better alternatives, cleaner burning natural gas. But my problem is you can't just force people into cleaner burning natural gas. You have to allow people to make a conscious decision. I think that's the problem with government. Fundamentally, government should not be making people's decisions. If they want to go green, let them go green. But don't force them onto natural gas and put all these small oil companies out of business.
See, what's fascinating, and I'm going to jump in on the climate change thing too, because I genuinely appreciate Rich's point of view on these topics. But if you want to talk about an environmentalist, our parents were environmentalists. They invented environmentalism compared to us. They lived in small houses. They had one car, right? They had a small refrigerator. Maybe they washed their clothes by hand. Maybe they cut their grass with a push lawnmower. When you look at their lifestyle compared to our excesses, they were the environmentalists. So we wake up every day thinking we're going to save the planet. That's silliness. First of all, the planet's going to do just fine. We may not, but the planet will be here. But so anyway, let me just mention on this global climate change. First of all, it started as global warming. Then it went to climate change, and that's not really scary enough. So now they're trying to evaluate what else they can call it. And now the latest one I heard was climate volatility. That sounds a little scarier than climate change. But here's what's interesting. Over the past 150 years, there have been hundreds of scientists that came out and said, the Earth's temperature has been remarkably stable in this period. And this is in a period where, in terms of the number of coal plants that have been brought online in the last 10 years in China, our global consumption on coal has never been higher, and yet temperatures aren't warming. And then you look over the past 5 years, and there's an extra 2 million miles of sea ice. Well, that's kind of hard to explain, right? And every time there's a storm, someone says, "Oh, that's the worst storm in 50 years." Oh, okay, so nothing's changed in 50 years. And the UN arm the arm of the UN that looks into and evaluates and tries to prognosticate the whole global warming thing. There have been over 50 of those scientists that in the past 2 years have now gone full circle and said, look, the data is flawed. You know, the sites and locations where you're taking measurements are flawed, non-existent. They're being tampered with. The data is skewed. You know, the left likes to say, okay, well, what if we're wrong and we're not causing global warming? What's the harm? I'll tell you what the harm is. You're putting everybody out of work. People are starving because you're investing this money. Caller, do you have a question?
Dave, you got it off.
Oh, Rich, welcome back.
Dave, where are you getting your facts from?
I told you, all you get is the truth. The question is, can you handle the truth?
You know, here's the thing. I have no idea. Here's the thing. This tape delay is too much for me. It's driving me crazy.
All right, Rich, you got to turn down your TV because there's a delay and it's getting you confused.
Yeah, I know. This is really brutal. All right, we on the same page now?
All right, let's go.
All right, where are you getting your information from? Please be specific and name your sources.
Well, let's see. That would be everything in the mainstream media. I mean, I can't do your research for you. You know, you're just gonna have to do a little digging.
I'm asking you to be specific and tell me what sources you're referring to, where you're getting your information from.
On which piece?
I want to find out why you've got everything so wrong.
Well, which piece do you want to know about? The 50 scientists that have now turned against the whole notion of man-made global warming? Or the piece on how coal-fired plants in China pollute 10 times more than the U.S.? Do you want facts on that?
Well, yeah, first of all, you know, the thing with the coal-burning plants in China, first of all, do you have any idea how much money China is going to invest in renewable energy this calendar year? You know, so I'll tell you, it's $56 billion. That's what the Chinese people are going to invest.
Yeah, that's only twice as much as we just spent on the vets, which we should do. So I don't know if that's a lot of money, you know. But anyway, do you have a question for Matt? Let's stay focused on Matt here.
Well, yeah, the thing, it seems that he understands about global warming and climate change. And how is he going to get elected as a Republican when he goes against, when he actually agrees with the science? Because if you're a conservative and a Republican, if you agree with facts, you're going to get kicked out of the party. So how is he going to handle this?
Well, all right, thanks, Rich.
So I can listen to you.
Thanks, Rich.
I think that there's a problem with the question in that you're stereotyping down to it. You think all Republicans are these hardcore, Tea Party, whatever you want to call them, guys, and you call them extremists, and you just assume, I'll never talk to a Republican, I'll never even listen to a Republican's point of view, because simply the fact that they're a Republican. Oh, you're a Republican, you must be for this, that, and the other thing. And it's the same thing when the right does it to the left, everyone gets all up in arms, and that's a problem. You've created these monsters on both sides of the aisles, and I just think it's incorrect. I believe that there are a lot of conservatives who share my opinion on climate change, especially in my district, where we're experiencing things like Hurricane Sandy and snowstorms in the same week for some reason.
There you go. That's maybe never happened before. Who knows? Anyway, caller, do you have a question for Matt?
I guess not necessarily a question for Matt, but maybe a suggestion. When a banana like that calls in and he won't quote his own source, cut him off, Dave. I'd like to hear his source for the renewable energy investments in China. And I'd further like to ask him if he's ever been to China, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing, Guangzhou. Guangzhou meaning the most industrialized city in China. And it's a whole, okay? So they need to spend at least the $56 or $60 billion. But I'd like to know his sources and if he's ever been to China and he's actually seen what it's like there.
That's a good point.
I'll listen to see if he calls back.
All right, thanks.
I'd love to be able to get him on and do a debate. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. So, Rich, if you're listening, let's see if you've ever tried to go for a jog in Shanghai without a gas mask, or look across the street there and see the other side. So, call back if you've got time. Well, I guess maybe Rich is calling back. So, Rich, what do you say? Yeah, who's there? I think we just lost you.
Speechless.
There you go. He lost his voice. Okay, so I had read, and this was about 6 months ago, that the amount of money that was being proposed by the left to spend to and this whole fighting climate change and global warming was going to be about $2 trillion over the next 100 years. It's probably dwarfed that by now. Bear with me a second. Caller, did you have a question? And the net benefit was going to be you would delay the point where we hit some type of concentration of pollutants by 4 years, over 100 years. This stuff is so hypothetical. The costs and implications are phenomenal. The reality, in my opinion, on the majority of this, is that the left is using this, much the way they tried to use healthcare, as a way to redistribute wealth. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Do you have a question for Matt?
Yes, I do. Matt, you're running for state senate, and that covers Milford, correct?
Yep.
Yes. Then that means your state senate, the current incumbent is Gail Schlossberg, who, in many circles, is hardly a progressive. In fact, she's very conservative on a lot of fiscal issues. And in fact, if I'm correct, and you would know that she voted against Dan Beloit's latest budget. But in terms of education, because I heard you talk about education a lot on the show here, talk about Common Core, which is, by the way, a Republican. It was actually first up by Democrats.
Oh, you're breaking up.
Go talk to Bridgeport. You know about that. But I want to find out about, in terms of education, what would you do differently than the current state senator? Because my understanding is that since she became a state senator, and she's a very popular one, by the way, education and funding in Milford has gone up by probably about 19 or 20%. So I want to find out what makes you different than the current state senator, and what would you do in terms of education, funding to Milford, that would be different than what Gail has done right now? Thank you.
Al, that's a great question. Thanks a lot.
Well, first off, to your point about her voting against Dan Malloy's budget, it's funny she voted against Dan Malloy's budget, but she didn't come out against it until after the vote had already happened, and then she voted to keep the taxes in place on multiple different occasions after the bills had come up through implementers and different means later on in the different sessions that she had been up there. She had also not proposed any alternatives of her own. That's not exactly leadership, and that's not exactly something we want. Education funding may increase, but that doesn't necessarily mean education scores increase. That's a fundamental problem. Throwing money on a fire is not ending the fire. You need to throw water on it. There's a lot of different things involving the education. I come back to the point where we have this teach to the test mentality, and in Connecticut, in my district, where I had done considerable research into the education test scores, we've actually gone down the last few years in our test scores. This stems from a lot of different issues.
Yeah, Al brings up a good point, and I always appreciate Al calling in because he is very, very informed and plugged in and connected, does his homework, and he knows Connecticut politics. We've had Al on the show numerous times, and he used to be intimately involved with the show. He knows Connecticut politics, and so I'm impressed that he took the time to research Gail Schlossberg's record. Caller, do you have a question for Matt?
Yes, I would like to know how he would, because I watched some of the dealings on Channel 20 that we have on Comcast with the state. The Democrats basically don't have to listen because they're in a majority. How is he going to handle that? Because just like some of your interesting callers, they don't feel they have to know facts because, one, they know it all and don't have to listen.
That's a really good point. Thank you very much. So let me just jump in on that one to build on what she just said. There's nothing I dislike more than when we have a politician on the show, I meet a politician on the street, and they say, we can work with the opposition. That's why you should vote for me. Because I'll tell you, I don't want someone working with the opposition, because every time they do, my taxes go up, there are more regulations, we lose more jobs. But anyway, how would you deal with the opposition?
You know, I know you're going to hate me for this, but there is common ground between a lot of it. And some of the senators, you know, you're not going to be able to work with. They're too far to the left. There are some you can work with. But the other problem is, no, I can't do this alone. If I'm elected, everything's not going to be, you know, perfect in Connecticut. We need to have more people come up to the Capitol. People in Connecticut need to start saying, you know what, I'm upset with the way things are. If you truly are that angry, you need to go up to the Capitol, find the time, go up, call your legislature, write your legislator, have them solve some of these problems and take more leadership and more responsibility for what they do.
That's a good message. Caller, do you have a question for Matt?
Yeah, quick follow-up. Let me try this one more time. Gail Schlossberg, who's a state senator, who's the incumbent, who you're running against, is probably one of the most conservative Democrats in the state, second only maybe to Joan Hartley, who is by far just a Democrat in name only. You have talked about, again, I repeat this again, that she voted against Dan Malloy's budget, and you're saying that she didn't offer any budget alternatives. As a candidate running for office, it's good to make a contrast against the other candidate, but I haven't seen you really offer any alternatives of your own in regards to education, specific alternatives in terms of education, or more importantly, the budget. So I want to get off education for a second. I would love to talk to you about transportation. I know we don't have enough time, but let's just talk about the budget again. What is your budget alternative that would be different than what Gail did? Because again, Gail is rather conservative when it comes to fiscal issues. I want to hear what you have specifically in store, in place. If you were state senator, what would be your budget proposal to the General Assembly? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Al.
I mean, I don't have an entire budget proposal. If you're expecting that from a candidate, you are asking a lot. And guess what? Senator Schlossberg does also not have a budget proposal, nor has she proposed any alternatives of her own. It is beholden on her to propose these alternatives, and unfortunately she hasn't. And you know, you keep calling her an independent. She's voted with her party over 95% of the time. I don't, you know.
Well, see, for someone on the left, that's considered a person that's conservative. It's only 95. So you got to be, you know, higher than 95 to be, you know, aligned with the left, I guess. But I mean, your platform has been to cut taxes, right?
Which we need to reduce spending for. You're not just, I'm sorry, and the first step is, you know, I'm up there, taxes aren't going to be cut the first year we're there. You got to reduce the spending. We got to start paying down some of the debt we have from a lot of these different programs. And
so it seems to me, not to lead the witness here, but there's only one way to resolve the financial situation in Connecticut. Rather than allocating dollars to these projects and everything and funding everything that's going on in Connecticut, what we have to do is say, here's the pie, and we're going to allocate a percentage of revenues, right?
Yep.
So, okay, you want to do that. Okay, we're gonna give you 2% and you 5%. Okay, but in the end of the day, it's going to add up to 100% of revenues. There are only so many revenues you can generate because you raise taxes to a certain point and it becomes a declining return.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, people were applauding Jerry Brown in California because he went from a deficit to a surplus. He made the bloody taxes retroactive. Well, how well does that work? Not very well. And then all of a sudden they're back into deficits. So in Connecticut, I mean, it's like I said, you would cut taxes, maybe reduce regulations that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Which
preserve the planet.
Yeah. To you know, the credit, I like to give credit where credit is due. The legislature is beginning to deregulate some of these absurd regulations. They reduced 1,000 pages of regulations this year, which is a good first step. But we need to keep building on that momentum. But the problem is, fundamentally, we're not going to change Hartford if we don't change who we send to Hartford. That's the problem. You keep sending the same people over and over again, and you're expecting these different results. You're asking me for solutions and all these other things. You know, where's her solutions? She's had 10 years to put them in place.
Right. Now, you have one of your taglines, and I read it in some of the things associated with your campaign, is that we're first in the things we should be last in, and we're last in the things we should be first in. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
We have the highest debt per capita. You know, my generation's getting stuck with that. We have some of the worst economies in the nation. CNBC ranked us 46th least friendly to do business in. I mean, these are huge problems we need to address, and frankly, the legislature doesn't seem to be addressing them. And there's this whole kind of lackadaisical attitude. Some of these incumbents have talked about the 10 points of why Connecticut's getting better. Look, as somebody who's directly impacted by these, try finding a job in Connecticut, an entry-level position for a college graduate. Go ahead, knock yourself out and tell me if it's easy. It's not, and that's why we're leaving and we're going elsewhere. There is a tremendous amount of fat in the budget. We created the Board of Regents for the college, the conscue system, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. The CSU AAUP asked for $80 million to update the tech infrastructure. Instead, they got $120 million and a central provost and all of these other positions that were supposed to be phased out from the colleges. And that's just one example of waste. The first 5, we've spent $400 million so far on the first 5. And it's just crony capitalism. It's corporate welfare, and you're helping, the big guys and you're ignoring the little guys.
Now, aren't the Connecticut budgets today borrowing from the future?
Yes.
To pay in the present?
Yep.
And so how does that end?
Not well, actually. Surprisingly, borrowing and stretching yourself so thin ends poorly. But it's funny, these politicians, they're not going to be the ones who have to deal with that. We are. My generation is. We're the ones who are getting stuck with these burdens.
Caller, do you have a call for Matt?
All right, last question. I'll be real fast. All right, Matt, real quick. In terms of transportation, as you know, Milford is on the Metro North line. Metro North has had a lot of problems in the past. In fact, there's a lot of talk in terms of doing stuff to revamp the Waterbury line. But I want to talk about the New Haven line because Milford uses a lot of Metro North. Mm-hmm. With a lot of problems with Metro North, what would you do if you were elected as state senator to address the problems with the Metro North line? And how would you pay for it? Thanks.
Thanks, Al.
I love somebody that does their homework. Al, phenomenal job. As Dave said, you are very well informed. And yes, Milford has a tremendous amount of commuters, people who rely on these trains daily, and people who rely on the highway system daily. The problem is with transportation, the funding was rated in 2011 to help balance that budget. It's mind-blowing that Dan Malloy is standing in front of these bridges that have broken going, we need to hold accountable to whoever rated these funds, and then pointing the finger at Jody Rell. Some responsibility here would be wonderful, and the Democrats in general need to stand up and say, you know what, we were in charge, we've made a mistake, let's put the funding back where it belongs in the transportation fund to help rebuild some of these bridges and older infrastructures and solve some of these problems with Metro North, which talk to any commuter, they will tell you, 15-minute delays every day. It's just been a perpetual thing for months and almost years now.
So, okay, here's another topic that I think you may have a different position on with Gail. And following the horrific events in Newtown, this rush to do something that was the same thing that got us into disastrous wars in the Middle East. We had, the people in Washington seized on the opportunity to turn this into a gun issue when it was a mental health issue the whole time. And so Gail voted in favor of one of the most restrictive gun bans of any state in America. Was she on the right side of that issue?
No, I don't think so. And it's funny, I was challenged by a gun member, and he said, you need to go to the shooting range because here's the problem with politicians. You're regulating something you know nothing about. And ask some of the legislators what's the difference between a semi-automatic and an automatic rifle. Oh, they're not going to be able to tell you. There were a lot of problems with that bill. One, you did nothing to inherently crack down on inner city violence, which a big portion of that problem is illegal gun violence. You need to do more to combat that. We've had other initiatives led by the federal government, Project Longevity, led by Director Grady, who, if you haven't gone to an event for, please go to an event for. He's an excellent speaker, and they're working to reduce gang violence because these gangs provide these vehicles for illegal firearms. In the bill, which we could have used to actually have meaningful conversations about mental health, which was just shoved to the side, and they were focusing only on the guns and illegal gun violence in the inner cities, and we didn't even mention that in the bill. And the other thing is, back to mental health for a minute, there's this one common link between a lot of these mass shooters and these other, incidences of crime, in that a lot of these people are on these prescription drugs, and big pharmaceutical goes completely unaccounted for. No politician is willing to stand up to this group and say, you know what, there's a problem here. When acne medicine has severe side effects, such as causing depression or suicidal thoughts, there's a problem there and it needs to be investigated. Unfortunately, on a state level, that becomes difficult to do. That's beholden to the Connecticut delegation to take that fight to Washington, but don't focus. Banning one type of rifle and thinking it'll end mass violence is like banning vodka and saying, all right, we're going to have no more drunk driving.
That's a great one-liner. That's terrific. It's interesting because I literally, after that situation occurred and I heard the direction they were going in and said, this isn't going to impact anything. Hang on one second. Caller, do you have a question for Matt?
No, I don't have a question for Matt, but I want to defend myself, Dave. And the caller that called up and challenged and said, where did I get my information from? I tell you, when I do my show, it's called Who's Telling the Truth?
We are.
This way, everybody can watch it. So you can tell that bonehead to go on YouTube and just go to Who's Telling the Truth with Rich Frasconi, and you can watch all my shows. And what I'd like to do with you is, Marty told me that you're going to be hosting the show next weekend. I mean, next Thursday.
That's right.
It's funny, but I'm available next Thursday. Why don't the two of us sit down like gentlemen so I can embarrass you face to face in front of your audience? What is that?
Let me give that some thought. Thanks a lot, Rich. So when that situation in Newtown occurred, I called every single politician that would take my call, and I said, listen, we can do something, I think, about school violence. One of the things you can do is you can put sound sensors in every classroom and in every room in a school. The second a gun is discharged, it identifies the type of gun, it identifies which room the shot was fired, the number of shots. All that information can immediately, and this is off-the-shelf technology that's being deployed in the inner city. That information can be sent to the authorities, to the police department, SWAT, whatever you want to call it, and it's go time. Right then and there, there's no delay. The other thing you can do is every teacher in a public school should have pepper spray. Because if you get it wrong with pepper spray, nobody dies, but you bought yourself 20 minutes if you got it right. Why doesn't every teacher have pepper spray? So, and not to belabor this point, but if you go through history, the worst attack in a school in American history was in Bath, Michigan. I think it was 1926 or 1928, and there were about 80 kids killed and 350 wounded, and there were no guns. The worst domestic terrorist attack in American history was Oklahoma City bombing. There were no guns. And the worst foreign attack, terrorist attack in American soil was 9/11, and there were no guns. They turned that into an anti-gun agenda, and it did nobody any good. Interestingly enough, in Newtown, gun permit applications exploded, and nationally right now, the fastest growing segment in society of gun ownership is women. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what would you have proposed to keep the schools safer?
There's one thing that needs to be said, and I know this isn't the politician answer that people are looking for. This isn't the politically correct answer. This is the realistic answer, though. We will never be 100% safe. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say, if only we had this, if only we had that. And the problem with a lot of these politicians is they'll say what you want to hear. I'm not going to say what you want to hear, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to put up with it. There are a lot of little things you can do, though. What you said with the sound sensor is a great idea. Easier access to call box, so you can, call 911 so the teachers are right there and they can get that response. It's, reducing that response time from the first incidents to getting the people there. In Milford, we unfortunately had an incident recently involving a stabbing, and their immediate response was, okay, well, let's get metal detectors. That's not going to make everyone 100% safe. It's just going to look for that sense of security. There are certain things, as you said, again, we can do some little common sense things.
The core of the problem is the complete disintegration of the home. If you rebuild the family unit, you will not have these type of problems. You just don't.
Well, I mean, not entirely true. We have some of these incidences come from people that come from very loving families, and that comes down to mental health. And again, back to my point, prescription medicine is a huge problem that, politicians don't want to address for some reason or another. It's time we start looking at what are we giving these kids? What are we doping them up on?
It's a really good point. We've got about 3 minutes left, so why don't you go for about 2 minutes here and make the case Actually, this is one of the best shows we've had, next to maybe Joe Markley coming on. Lo and behold, you two guys know each other very well, and you think highly of Joe. So make the case. I mean, you've already made the case over the past 50 minutes, but why are you right?
We, as I said before, we can't change Hartford unless we change who we're sending to Hartford. And that's the problem here. We're sending the same old, and my generation is fed up. I'm tired of hearing, oh, well, this person got us more funding, this person got us more bonding. At the end of the day, that's more debt that I have to pay back, that me and my future family that I would love to start in Connecticut has to pay back. We're a young generation coming of age now, and we're fed up, and we're standing up, and we're saying no more. No more of this ridiculous logic that, oh, if only we had, $200 million more, or if only we got rid of, thing X, everything would be perfect. As you said before, we're a very cynical generation. We're a generation that was born in the 90s and came of age in the Great Recession, the aptly named decade from hell that opened with 9/11 and closed with unemployment in the double digits. Our generation inherently doesn't believe what these politicians are trying to sell us, and we're standing up now. And, I'm glad to see some of this conversation shifting. I'm glad to see there's a more focus on youth, but we need to see more of it come in. I'm not going to be the be all and end all. And again, I know that's not the politician thing to say, but it's the truth. If I'm elected, Connecticut's not going to be this perfect utopia of, free market capitalism and everyone's going to have a job. There'll be 0% unemployment, but, we can't do any worse.
So what should we be first in?
First in
job creation?
Job creation would be one of those wonderful things. And, we could be last in taxes, combined taxes. We have some of the highest combined taxes anywhere. Some people, our taxes, property taxes in Milford are going up 3% every year. It's ridiculous. And a lot of it stems from the state screwing up on the state level and pushing these burdens down into municipalities, and the state legislature saying, oh, it's their fault property taxes are so high. It's their fault for not leading the cause. I don't believe that. I think there should be some ownership, and I think there should be ownership of what happened. If you've been there for 10 years, you're part of the problem, and you have to have proposed some pretty serious reforms and fought the establishment pretty hard for me to credibly believe that you deserve re-election and you deserve, another 2 years or another 4 years, whatever it is.
Absolutely a fabulous, fabulous message. I hope everybody that started the show stayed tuned in for the entire show, because in my opinion, Matt has given me hope in America. Once again, hope in Connecticut. The Democrats are hell-bent on doing for Connecticut what they did for Detroit. They just don't want you to know. We started the show tonight with a couple of Bible verses. I'm going to end with one. Ezekiel 10:2. The wise man leans to the right, the fool leans to the left. Figure it out. God had a sense of humor. He wanted to be on the right side of things. I want you and encourage you to tune in next Thursday night. We're going to have a person on the show named Matlin Register, who's going to knock your socks off at age 13. Come back. We're going to look forward to seeing you on the show again. Matt, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
You knocked the ball out of the park. I'm serious. I think you're going to, see fundraising explode at this point. So you got your work cut out for you, huh? Knocking down doors. I think.